Okay, I want to talk to you about Paul Wolfowitz, the Wolfowitz
Yeah.
Doctrine. Before we do that, I just want to say that Paul Wolfowitz, doesn't he also a very typical like a deep state person, very much like a Victoria Nuland, right? That
Yeah.
Victoria Nuland is in and out of the State Department. Paul Wolfowitz he was, in and out of the DoD, Department of Defense. None of them are really elected officials, but they are just always there, very influential to Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and to the president. Isn't it? That it's just a very typical.
That is absolutely correct. I mean, Paul Wolfowitz was absolutely part of the permanent government of the United States. It didn't matter who was in the Oval Office. Paul Wolfowitz was always in power. And the Wolfowitz Doctrine, as you absolutely correctly said in the message you sent to me, still shapes American foreign policy to this day. Nothing's changed.
The reason I paid attention to this is the
Mhm.
footage I sent to you, right? That Wesley Clark was talking about.
Yeah,
Most people familiar with what he was saying after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon and then saw the document about those 7 countries in the Middle East.
yes,
But then later he actually thought about it, and then he remembered he had encounter with Paul Wolfowitz in 1991 after Desert Storm. And that's when Wolf was saying, okay, first of all, he think they should go all the way, not just in and out of Iraq. That was a mistake. But also he said that, okay, we notice that the Soviet is not going to do anything. That means this is our opportunity
yeah,
to basically in control of the Middle East. And he said that before another superpower emerges. So that
yeah,
this Wolfowitz doctrine, I think, started then, and then I think he wrote a paper. I think it's
yeah,
called the Defense Planning
yeah,
Guidelines, something, which is, I guess, formalized his idea, which is later be called the Wolfowitz
yeah,
Doctrine. And today, if we look back of what he was planning, like those 7 countries, which I think probably at the time, the most provocative thing about the Wolfowitz Doctrine from that document is preemptive strike. And I think it's September 11 almost, the people, not just him, but people who are with him who believe that they use September 11 as a way to prove preemptive strike is needed because
yes,
they would say, you see, this is what happens when we don't do that. So that make this preemptive strike kind of normalized. People now accept
yeah,
that now. And then subsequently they have the 7 countries.
yeah,
And the other thing in the document also potential rivalries. They named Russia, Germany, and China. That
yeah.
was in the document as well. So you see, that's where we are today. And like
Yes.
you said, we're pretty much still living in that document, isn't it?
We are absolutely living in that document. I mean, I was aware that Wolfowitz had written a document in the early 90s in which he had said that the United States should work to prevent the emergence of another superpower rival. That now that the Soviet Union had exited the scene, it was essential for the United States to maintain indefinitely its global primacy. And I was aware that he'd said that. I was not aware that as early as 1991, he was already planning um, for the United States to rebuild and reshape and control the entire Middle East. That I did not know. But it doesn't surprise me. And of
Mhm.
course, everything that we have seen since then basically follows from that. Um, because the neocons have a fixation with the Middle East. On the one hand, they've convinced themselves that the Middle East is some kind of pivot, that if they could control the Middle East, that will give the United States some kind of advantage over any conceivable rival superpower, be it China, Russia, or Germany. Nobody takes seriously the idea of Germany now, but Russia or China or any of those. So that's one reason. The other reason is, of course, the reason the neocons themselves never give, but it's always there. It's always deep down under the surface, which is that, of course, they want to do everything they possibly can to advance Israel's position in the
Mhm,
Middle
mhm.
East. They see Israel as the indispensable and essential ally in the Middle East. They are very committed to the alliance with Israel. Many of them, I think, would describe themselves as Zionists, just to say, and they are therefore um, determined to see the destruction of all possible challenges to Israel within the Middle East as well. So that's never quite set out there in these documents, but it's always there. And it's they always frame reshaping of the Middle East in this sort of way as exclusively about American interests. But of course, they are also looking to defend Israeli interests, which they always insist are identical to American ones.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's never spelled out clearly, but like one
No.
of the things in the documents, it says, oh, another major U.S. objective should be safeguard U.S. interests and promote American values. Well, then subsequently we see color revolutions, Arab Springs happening in the Middle East, right? So it's very much in there, I think. So,
Yeah.
so that does it mean now they are all focusing on Iran now? Because the seven
Yes.
countries, more or less, they all happened, not exactly, happened the way they wanted,
No.
but they destroyed one country after another. Okay. They're fine with the chaos and people, getting killed and homeless
No.
and become refugees. They don't care any of that. That's fine. As long as they can get rid of the leaders they don't like, that's it. So
Yes.
now it seems like Iran is definitely the next, and possibly Turkey. I mean, they seems like they have a pipeline of countries they want to destroy. So
Yes.
Turkey may be next. I don't know. What do you think?
Yes, it probably it presumably would be, but I do think that the next country they're going to target is Iran. There's already articles appearing about this. Now, Iran is a different society from any of the ones that we've talked about. It is a much more open politics. It is a much more powerful and sophisticated economy, even if it's been one that's been restricted by sanctions. It's got much more powerful armed forces. It's very, very much bigger. And in population terms, it's on a completely different scale with 90 million people. So it's a much, much more difficult country to take on in that way. But they will want to try and take on Iran. I think that is um, a real objective. And well, we'll see what they do.
Another thing is, since they talk about the Russia, Germany, that potential rivalries, I feel like there's always like this feeling about Germany is always a little bit put them on the
Yeah.
edge a little bit. And so I wonder whether is it fair to say the Anglo-Saxon sphere, Britain, United States, they don't want to see Germany-Russia alliance. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, absolutely. They are always very, very suspicious in the end of Germany. Obviously, they fought world wars against Germany,
Uh-huh.
so I mean, bear in mind there is that history. But there's always a sense somehow that the Germans um, they're pulled towards the West, but
Mhm.
their interests lie with the East. And there are many Germans, by the way, who historically have seen that. So if the Germans and the Russians come together and work together, historically, they've always been able to dominate Europe. I mean, when the Germans and the Russians came together, they defeated Napoleon, for example. When the Prussians and the Russians came together in 1870, Germany was united. When Hitler and Stalin agreed their non-aggression pact, Hitler was able to conquer the whole of Europe in just a few months. So I mean, just say, whenever Germany and Russia fall out, it's often very bad news for both of these countries. So there's always this desire to keep them divided from each other. In fact, there's that famous quote by Lord Ismay, who was the first Secretary General of NATO, who was once asked, "What is NATO?" And he said, "Well, what NATO is, what it's about is keeping the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down." I mean, it was that was what it was all supposed to be about. Um, it's become even more complicated now because, of course, Russia is now aligned. They would say, I mean, remember, these are people who think in bloc terms.
Mhm.
Russia is now aligned with China. If Germany aligns with Russia, then it's by extension aligned with China as well. It's had long-standing economic connections with China. It
Mhm.
trades with China quite a lot. It's done a lot of business with China. So that makes it even more dangerous. We can't have the Germans and the Russians coming together. We can't have the Germans and the Chinese coming together. And we absolutely can't have all three coming together,
Yeah,
because
together.
that would be an absolute massive threat to us. And it would be the end of the world as we know it. Always remember what I said. At the end of it, at the base of it, today, China is always there at the root of their obsessions.
It drives them crazy then.
Yeah. China does drive them crazy. First of all, because they're in awe of it. I mean, they sense when they deal with China that they're dealing with a civilization and a country that is immeasurably older than themselves. All Europeans have this to some extent. The Russians definitely have it. They're straightforward enough to admit that to me. So but they all have this sense of awe of China because of its size, the greatness of its civilization. They have that too. Um, in the case of the Americans, there's a particular fear because they've never been up against an adversary like China before, one that is, bigger, industrially stronger than they are, they're fully equal in technology. It's something that really, really makes them very nervous.
Now, I wonder whether that's the reason that, remember Russia trying to get into NATO, right? Several
Yeah,
times they showed interest. Is that the reason they would never allow Russia to join NATO? Because that will provide opportunities for Russia and Germany to work together. Is that the reason?
absolutely. Absolutely, That's one of the main reasons.
Uh,
I mean, Russia altogether is just too big to be
yeah.
controlled. Russia inside NATO would um, uh, open up potential for challenging the hegemony of the US. And that's something that the Americans would never allow. But the idea of Russia joining NATO and ganging up with Germany would be an American nightmare.